Alaskans, wherever you are, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Welcome, everybody, to the Must Read Alaska Show. I'm your host, John Quick, coming to you live from somewhere in Alaska. I hope everybody's having a phenomenal weekend. And man, the sun is out. I hope everybody gets out there and gets some sun rays and experience some sun because, man, we had quite the winter, man. Anchorage got, I think, a record snow of 100 and something inches, which is just crazy. And so everybody around the state, I'm sure, is grinning ear to ear to get some sun. If you like Must Read Alaska and you watch, read, or listen to us, you want to help keep the lights on, just go to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. If you want to sponsor the Must Read Alaska show, just email me, John, John, at mustreadalaska.com, and we'd love to have you sponsor the show. We have a special guest today, Chris Story. He is the author of the Millionaire Maker, a new book. He is a real estate agent, an expert and broker of his own firm down in Homer. And he has his own podcast, a couple of them. One we were just talking about with him. He has something like 700 episodes, which is pretty awesome. So Chris, welcome to the Must Read Alaska show. Happy you're on today.
Thank you, John. My pleasure to be here. Appreciate it. I'm a fan of the
This
show.
will be fun.
And
Nice.
I'm a subscriber to Must Read Alaska. Anybody who's not, sign up today. It's worth it.
Well, I appreciate it. This will be fun hearing a little bit about your story and, for our audience to get to know you a little bit. First, talk to me about what spurred you on to get into the real estate game in the first place. Give us a story. Everybody's got a story.
Yeah, I agree with that. Everybody does have a story, and mine isn't that interesting, but it is to me, and I like hearing about it, so I'll enjoy telling you. My grandfather moved to Alaska in 1947. He was a World War II bomber pilot. He flew B-28s and had so many missions that he ended up in the hospital for a year following his service with, I think, what today we would call post-traumatic stress disorder and a number of heart attacks at age of 30. And he just was at a point where being in the crowded metropolis of Detroit post the war was too much. So he and my grandmother and my mother at age 2 drove the Alaskan right behind the Army who built it and got to Anchorage, and he was flying groceries into Homer, and he flew over Homer a couple of times and said, this is where I need to be. Bought 160 acres. He bought out 2 brothers that had inherited a homestead, and he bought them out for $10,000. 160 acres on the Homer East End bench for 10 grand. Flew back to Anchorage, and my grandmother said, are you insane? There's no road to Homer. What are we going to do with that property? Well, eventually there was a road. They moved to Homer, opened a grocery store in downtown Homer, in the greater metroplex of Homer, as I like to call it, and ran that grocery store until 1975, and they sold it. And they were all along developing their 160 acres and would sell a parcel from time to time. And my brother and my mom and dad and I and my aunt and uncle and my cousins, we all grew up sort of on and around that property and watched my grandpa sell a piece of land. And then that's what he did. And then they would spend their winters outside. And it just made sense. My father was also a builder in the mid-70s through the 80s and always worked with a realtor. So he built homes, custom homes and spec homes and owned businesses. And he always had a realtor there alongside. And they became part of sort of his team, if you will, to a point where I saw that and thought, it's pretty cool. They always drove nice cars too. I liked that. And they're always clean, nice cars. And that's pretty cool. But pottery became like not just a passion, but a vocation in high school. In fact, my senior year, and this is not bragging at all, this has actually led to my own academic downfall. I spent 5 out of 6 of my senior year periods I spent in the pottery studio. Came out of school and became a full-time potter. I said, this is what I'm going to do. And my wife and I did have a company, and for 10 years, and that's what we did. We sold pottery around 8, 9 different states, and we supplied 75 to 80 gift shops and galleries throughout the year. And then one day I said, I want to do something different. I remembered how much I admired the realtors that had been part of our family's life. And I said, I'm going to do that. And that was in 2002. And so we launched Story Real Estate in 2007. And along with it, concurrently, a radio program. And one of the taglines of the radio program was, because you need to have a tagline, and it was, you really can make $1 million in your own backyard. And so we ended up, for 17 years now, we've had a segment on the show called The Backyard Millionaire. And then in 2021, there was a pandemic, or 2020, there was a pandemic, as you'll recall. And in March 28th, I sat down at my computer, locked down like everybody else, and said, I'm going to write a book. And that book was this, The Backyard Millionaire, How to Create Wealth Where You Are with What You've Got. And it was a sort of a fable. It's a bit of a parable. It's my story about working at the hardware store. And a man came up and sort of touched me on the shoulder and said, read this book, it'll change your life. And that book was called The Buy and Hold Real Estate Strategy. And it did change my life. That was 1993. And I had no prospects, no plans to go to college, no way to actually make a living or a career beyond pottery. But that book stuck with me. I still have a copy of it to this day. And I read it, at least read a chapter out of about once a week. And it really did. He said, if you read this, because he knew I wasn't going to college, and his grandkids and I were contemporaries, and they were in college when he gave me the book. And he said, I know you're not going to college, but if you'll read this book, it'll be equivalent to a 4-year degree in real estate. I took him at his word and immediately put into practice what that book taught, and then started managing an apartment building. And all of that is sort of woven into this book, The Backyard Millionaire. And it's like I said, it's a parable, but it's my story woven in, and a number of mentors along the way, sort of an amalgamation of about a half a dozen people that influenced me, to include my father. And so that then became its own radio program and its own podcast. And we then this year came out with the book you were kind enough to mention, called The Millionaire Maker, which is a nonfiction book of how-to. It's 6 practical steps to your first 4 homes. And we thought about like this backyard millionaire concept because I really believe it's true. Anybody, you could look around this neighborhood I'm talking to you and look around your neighborhood, pick 4 properties, own them, and you'll have a millionaire's net worth. You'll have $1 million plus in net worth. Now, mind you, 17 years ago, the average price of a home was $250,000, hence 4. I've kept it at 4 because today you could probably own 2 to the equivalent of $1 million, or even 1 and have an equivalent of $1 million net worth. But the point of 4 is that it creates cash flow. And it's like a ship's wheel. The larger the leverage, the more growth and appreciation you can experience over the life of owning those. So that's a long way of answering the question, which is to say, real estate's been part of my life since I was a kid. And even though it was a bit subconscious and I was just around it, and I used to pick up nails at my father's construction site. And anyway, so real estate and building and remodeling has been part of my family since I was born.
That's pretty awesome. It's fun to hear the journey that you've been on. What do you think some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned over the last 20 years in real estate are? If you could pick 1 or 2 and kind of share them with folks, and hopefully they could glean from them, what are 1 or 2 that are kind of been insightful for you over the years?
Buy and hold. So I have another expression that we use throughout the books as well, called buy and hold equals gold. It really is the ultimate secret to it all. And I didn't recognize it. And I have a confessional story in The Millionaire Maker where I talk about one of the chapters about a property that my wife and I sold before we had the belief in ourselves to be investors per se. We already were, didn't recognize it, sold that property. And I've told the story many times. We lost, over the 20 plus years since we sold it, we had effectively lost somewhere on order of $700,000 in potential capital, or appreciation and gains that way, but also lost rents. And we just didn't have the vision to see what was happening in the market or what we were capable of. And so those are the 2 things I would say that I've learned over these, 30 years of managing properties for other people, 25 years of managing our own properties, is buy, hold, that equals gold. And secondly, believe that you can do it. Anything you can conceive and believe, you can achieve, as Napoleon Hill said in 1930.
That's pretty awesome. So one of the things that I've appreciated about you is your ability to kind of let people peek behind the curtain. You do that with your radio show and your podcast. Tell me the strategy behind that, because I think, you could have just done real estate and not done a podcast and not done a radio show and just kind of stuck to yourself and done your thing and probably been successful at it. But how important is it, and why is it important for you to kind of share this with other folks?
Great question. I think I would answer it with going back to what I said previously, that a guy called Chuck Huff took an interest in me. His son and daughter-in-law own Catchment Bay Title in Homer, Stewart Title of the Peninsula, and Kenai Soldotna. I was working at a hardware store, and again, GED, no high school diploma, no college prospects whatsoever, no real vision of going forward other than I'm going to build this pottery company and it's going to be fantastic. But I didn't see beyond that. I just saw the craft of that and thought, okay, that's possible for me, maybe. And Chuck Clough came along and tapped me on that shoulder and said, I see something in you. I believe in you. If you'll read this book, it will change your life. He didn't have to do that. He didn't know me from Adam. He didn't have to influence me in that way and say, I believe you, I believe in you, and I think you could do this. So that book made the difference in my life. And so I've seen the value of sharing. I've seen the value of teaching. We have a little segment, it's a little 1 minute vignette called, On Top of the World in a Minute. And then we have a Millionaire Minute. And both of those are just small little vignettes I read every day. I have a library, which that Buy and Hold Strategy was one of the first books in it. And I read every day in my library. And I take bits of the knowledge that I get out of those books and I share it in these little 1 minute vignettes. And somebody that I'd known a long time ago from my past approached me through Facebook and said, easy for you to say. This is all easy for you to say. And I said, wow. And I said, let me just explain to you where these things are coming from. It's not easy for me to say. In fact, I've walked and fallen more. I've tripped and fallen more than probably you have. The difference is I'm willing to just say, here's what I've gone through. Here's the solution. And I think it's just part of who I am. I've never been bashful about that. My wife and I had our daughter. We were teenage parents, and we've been now celebrating our daughter's 35th birthday today. So we've been together for 36 years, and there's just no sense in not sharing some of the trials and tribulations you've been through and just saying, here's how we did it. It might work for you. In fact, throughout this book, which I'll continue to hold up, I don't know why, but it's just a great visual for sales. And I'm not suggesting you go to Amazon.com and buy 2 to 10 copies of this right now. Not necessary. But throughout this book, I say, if I can do it, you can do it. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that we can all have, is to share what's worked for me. And if it works for you, if it means something to you, great, take it. Otherwise, you can let it go and move on and find somebody that can teach you something that you need.
Nice. Well, for folks listening in, Chris recently wrote The Millionaire Maker. For the first person that emails me, I'm going to send them a copy of it. So John, JOHN at mustreadalaska.com, email me and say you want a copy of The Millionaire Maker. I'm going to send the first person that does it. So I'm going to get a boatload of emails, but the first one that sends it to me, I'm going to send them a copy. So let's talk a little bit about this book, Chris. You kind of teased about it earlier on, but let's get into some of the meat of it. What can somebody expect if they pick this book up and read it? And maybe what's one of your favorite chapters in it?
Okay, yeah. You can expect sort of a blueprint, if you will. On the back of it, it says, unlock the gateway to prosperity. And I think that's really what it is. It's not all of the answers. It's a blueprint. It's 6 practical steps to your first 4 homes. And the word first matters in the subtitle because you may not want to stop at 4. You may want to move on to commercial property. You may want to move on to a dozen. There was a man that I met in 1994, a year after Chuck introduced me to that Buy and Hold book. His name was Oscar. And he, at the time, was 85 years old. He had over 1,400 apartment units in between Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. He had commercial buildings. He lived in a penthouse, one of his own buildings overlooking the marina. He had restaurants, he had hotels and motels, and he was an incredible mentor because he made it seem possible. He said, there's a way to do this. And his story is really kind of cool. If I could just share for just a brief minute, I'll get back to your actual question. He said at one point he was a ship at 55. And if this doesn't inspire everybody listening, I don't know what would. At 55, Oscar went to the lower coast of Washington and built him and his wife a little vacation home. And he went back to the shipyard, and people that he knew said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, I built a little vacation home for Ollie and I down on the coast. And they said, would you build me one? And he said, sure. And at 55, he quit the shipyard. He'd been a superintendent in the shipyard, and he went to work for himself building homes. At 85, fast forward 30 years, I meet him. Again, he had amassed what I just explained. And it was just like, this is amazing. This is incredible. It may not be for you. You may want to stop at 4 homes, but you don't have to. This blueprint, or this guidebook, if you will show you the path and the pattern with which you can repeat and find success at 1, 2, 4, or a dozen homes. It's up to you. And I think the first chapter, it's called More Valuable Than Gold, tells the story about my dad coming into my pottery shop that I was renting. And he interrupted me in the middle of the day and said, "Come with me." And I said, "Well, I'm open. My business is open. I can't just leave." And he looked around. There was nobody there. And he just smiled. He said, let's go. And we drove down the street and he showed me a parcel that was for sale. And he said, "Why don't you buy this lot and build yourself a building?" And I said, "Well, I can't do that." And as I say in the book, he might as well have asked me to flap my wings and fly to the top of a tree. It just seemed impossible. But he made it possible, not by loaning us money. He did not loan us a dollar. He loaned us relationships. He loaned us belief in ourselves, and he loaned us a pattern and a set of plans with which to build a building, to make it all possible from going to the bank. He did not co-sign, but he stood there with us, helped me make the application. He stood there all along, and he was right beside us, but we did it for ourselves. And I think that's what this book is that it's a way to have me come along beside you. I've been doing this for 32 years. I'm beside you, and I'm going to help you with these 6 steps. And in the back of the book is all of my contact information, and I invite people to connect with me free of charge. Just come and connect with me, and I'll help you any way I can.
That's awesome. So folks listening in, if you email me, just email me right now, John, JOHN @mustreadalaska.com. The first person to do that, I'm going to send a copy of the Millionaire Maker to. Chris, if you could take a time machine and go back 25, 30 years and give yourself a piece of advice, what would you give yourself?
That the lack of a high school diploma doesn't mean anything. So I let that hold me back for a long time. I didn't graduate. I was in the class of 1991, and I missed every class reunion since, and it loomed over me like a cloud, probably for 20 years, like a cloud. And it wasn't that long ago that I actually realized it's irrelevant. The lack of quote unquote education, the lack of a diploma or a degree doesn't really mean anything. And I would tell myself to probably push a little harder, a little faster, but also being present. We have a coin. We mint a coin every year, and last year's coin on the back of it, and we give out 100 each year. And on the back of the coin last year, it said, to learn from your past, look forward, but live in the present. So all of that is really what I would tell myself from 20, 30 years ago, that it doesn't matter. GED versus a PhD versus not even a high school education. I mean, my great grandfather didn't actually go beyond the 6th grade, but he was an incredible farmer and had a reputation in the county in Florida where he lived, and as being a problem solver and a very successful man with over 1,200 acres to his name. So it's irrelevant. Just be yourself and be present, and also be patient. Success takes time. And that's what I love about this whole concept of Backyard Millionaire. I call it getting rich slowly. It's not about getting rich quick. I cringe every time I see an infomercial or commercial for somebody saying you get rich overnight with real estate, because if you get rich that fast, you're about to bust. And it's about slowly allowing things to cook at the right temperature and over time. And I'm not suggesting getting rich quick is a problem if you do it efficaciously and you follow a good plan, but it's not necessary. And patience is probably the missing ingredient from most people's success plans.
So you've probably seen an economy go up and down and sideways and every way, which way in between in your 20, 30 years of experience here. Where do you think the current state of the Alaska economy is? Is it good? Is it bad? Are you hopeful? Give us the scoop as somebody who has a thumb on the pulse of the economy.
I'm ever the optimist, but at the same time, I did live through the rise of 2002 to 26 and 07, and then the subsequent bust, which Alaska never really busted, but it changed. Our market changed. The difference is that we are attracting a different kind of people than maybe we were during the oil pipeline days, or some of the other booms that we've experienced. We're now attracting people, this is sort of the gig economy, and people using like we are right here, work together through technology, and we're seeing more and more of that, more retirees. So the other thing I say in the book is that I don't know the market 60 miles up the road. I'm a backyard millionaire. I'm a backyard expert. And so, but as a result of being an expert in my own backyard and my economy, we're all obviously related and tangentially related and connected. My experiences with the realtors that I talk to around the state, and bankers and builders and developers, is that we have a pretty robust and incredible economy, and I think it's going to keep moving forward. We are getting more and more contacts. This is, I think, ubiquitous statewide from people that want to move here. Some people want to move out, but just as many want to be here, and they're bringing with them retirement dollars. They're bringing with them their mobile dollars from their remote work, and corporations that they own corporations, but they don't want to bring the corporation here, but they want to live here, and they want to continue to work out there, but live here. So I'm pretty optimistic. I think we have an opportunity to squander at this point if we can't get our ducks in a row in Juneau. If our legislature can't solve their own problems, they're going to have to be solved through trials and tribulations that we'll all have to live through. But I think ultimately a safeguard and a hedge against all of that is real estate. If I could convince just 10 people today to go buy and invest more of their own backyard, invest right where you are with what you've got and get started and own more. Don't wait for it to be gobbled up by people from outside. Own your own backyard. Then I think our economy would be doing better.
Awesome. Well, 20 minutes has gone by in a flash here. Chris, tell folks where they can find you at. Give us your website, where you're at on social media, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure folks will want to jot it down. I'll put it in the podcast description as well, but just so people can take a mental note.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I love HomerAlaska.com. That's my warehouse for everything. I've got my bookstore there, my podcast there, real estate search statewide. And connect with me at ilovehomeralaska.com. Facebook, I tried a lot of the different social medias, but Facebook is about the only thing that kind of fits for me for whatever reason. I'm just Chris Story on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, Chris, we want to thank you for joining us here on Must Read Alaska. Folks listening in, if you just got the tail end here, I want to encourage you to go back and listen to the whole thing. Chris Story has got a new book out, Millionaire Maker. He is a real estate broker, and he has his own firm down there in Homer. And he has his own podcast as well and a radio show. I want to encourage you to check that out. We'll put all the links in the podcast description for folks that listen, watch, and read Must Read Alaska. If you want to help keep the lights on, just go to mustreadalaska.com. And on the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. If you want to sponsor the Must Read Alaska show, just email me, John, John, at mustreadalaska.com. Hope everybody has a phenomenal week. Rest of the week, rest of the weekend. And until next time, I'm John Quick from somewhere in Alaska. Thanks so much, Chris, for joining us.
My pleasure.